What happens when a decorated veteran, a man who served his country with honor, walks into a store expecting a simple act of respect, only to face humiliation instead? How does a routine shopping trip for his ailing wife turn into an unexpected confrontation with prejudice? Can dignity, built over decades of service, be stripped away by the cruelty of a single man? And when injustice rears its ugly head, who will step forward to set things right? For James Jimmy Carter, a quiet man who had never sought attention, the answer comes in the form of an unlikely witness, a legendary actor who refuses to stay silent. But will one moment of kindness be enough to undo the damage, or will it spark something far greater? Before we continue this story, let us know where you are watching from. If you like stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another special story for you. James Jimmy Carter stood at the automatic doors of everyday essentials, mustering a small surge of resolve before stepping inside. At 68, this African-American veteran carried himself with quiet dignity. His army uniform, adorned with carefully arranged badges, testified to years of service and sacrifice, yet he sought no special treatment. All he wanted today were vital supplies for his wife, Lucille, who lay bedridden at home. Ever since her health took a sharp decline, these weekly shopping trips had become a lifeline. The veteran discounts offered by the store helped stretch his limited budget a little further, and he appreciated that small acknowledgement of his contribution to the nation. Normally, Jimmy's routine was quick and efficient. He knew every aisle by heart, from medical supplies to fresh produce, and exactly how much of each item his savings and Social Security checks allowed him to buy. But as soon as he stepped inside, he felt disoriented. The shelves were rearranged. The product categories shuffled. Items he typically found in the hygiene aisle were nowhere to be seen. Confusion battled with frustration, and worry flickered across his mind. He had left Lucille alone longer than usual, and the longer he searched, the more time she would be left without assistance. Maddie, a young cashier who recognized him from previous visits, greeted him warmly. She sympathized when he mentioned the new layout. With a supportive nod, she directed him to where the adult diapers, hygiene products, and medical essentials had been moved. Thanking her, Jimmy navigated the reconfigured aisles, mentally calculating costs. A sense of dread weighed on him. If the prices were higher or if the veteran discount policy had changed, he might not be able to afford everything Lucille needed. When he finished collecting the must-have items, adult diapers, antiseptics, some bandages, he found himself in the newly arranged fresh produce section. Vibrant apples, bright strawberries, crisp leafy greens, and lean chicken sat on display, accompanied by a promotion sign boasting 15% off. He hesitated. Lucille's doctor had recently emphasized the importance of a balanced diet. Maybe he thought he could afford just a few healthy treats if the discount and his veteran benefits aligned. The thought of surprising Lucille with something fresh and flavorful lifted his spirits. Pushing his cart to Maddie's checkout lane, he unloaded the items carefully. She greeted him with a genuine smile, scanning each product with a practiced hand. Her voice was gentle. "How's Lucille?" "Mr. Carter, she's fighting," he replied, returning a faint smile. "I'm making sure she has everything she needs." Maddie scanned the items and attempted to apply the veteran discount, but her expression fell. Furrowing her brow, she tapped her screen repeatedly. "Mr. Carter, I'm so sorry," she said quietly. "Our system isn't letting me apply the discount to these hygiene products. It looks like a new policy was activated this morning." His heart sank. "But these are essential for Lucille," he explained, voice tinged with disbelief. "I bought them with a discount for years." Maddie met his gaze apologetically. "I understand. I had no idea this change was coming. It must have been decided by the new management. I wish I could override it, but I can't." With the total climbing higher than he could afford, Jimmy realized he had no choice but to remove the fresh produce. He didn't have enough cash to cover everything without the discount. The reality stung. These were the very items that might brighten Lucille's day. Yet, practicality won out over sentiment. fighting off a rising sense of helplessness. He asked Maddie if he could speak to the store manager. Perhaps a polite conversation might resolve the issue. Maybe the new policy was a misunderstanding or something that could be appealed. Maddie nodded, worry etched into her features. She pressed the store intercom button and summoned Dale Johnson, the newly appointed manager. While they waited, Jimmy tried to maintain a calm facade. He reminded himself that courtesy and tact often achieved more than anger. Still, he couldn't ignore the anxiety creeping up his spine. If the manager upheld the policy, how would he continue caring for Lucille's basic needs? Suddenly, Dale Johnson appeared. Younger than expected, with dyed blue hair, he approached the register with purposeful strides. He sported an air of impatience that made Jimmy cautious. The manager barely acknowledged Maddie. Instead, he turned to the decorated veteran with a steely stare. "I'm Dale Johnson," he announced curtly. "What's the problem?" Jimmy inhaled slowly to steady his nerves, explaining the situation in the same calm, respectful tone he'd always used, even under pressure in the military. But as he finished, Dale's lips curled into a smirk that hinted at something far more troubling than a simple policy dispute. The immediate tension in Dale Johnson's posture told Jimmy he was dealing with more than just a new manager who wanted to enforce company rules. The dismissive glare in Dale's eyes felt personal. Trying to maintain composure, Jimmy restated his case. "I've been shopping here for years, sir. The veteran discount helped cover critical items for my wife. Any chance you might reconsider, or at least provide a grace period?" Dale let out a condescending laugh. "Reconsider?" he sneered. "This isn't a negotiation. If you can't afford it, go somewhere else." A hush fell over the surrounding patrons. Even those not directly watching could sense the tension flaring. Jimmy's cheeks grew warm with humiliation, but he refused to lash out. He remembered his training, the discipline that had carried him through deployments. He recalled the creed that a soldier does not abandon his post. Right now, his post was advocating for Lucille's needs. "Sir," Jimmy began, controlling the tremor in his voice, "I served this country for decades. Many veterans like me rely on these discounts for essentials. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity. If your store's reputation is built on supporting vets, this policy change without warning doesn't align with that." But Dale's eyes only hardened. "Serve your country." "Huh?" he spat, voice dripping with disdain. "Look, old man, your kind shouldn't have served in the first place. We don't need help from people like you." Jimmy felt the world tilt for a moment. There was not just a denial of a discount, but an open display of racism. The manager's emphasis on your kind hung in the air like a dark cloud. A few customers audibly gasped. Maddie's face went pale. "Excuse me," Jimmy managed, though his throat felt tight. Dale jabbed a finger at Jimmy's uniform badges. "Those supposed to be participation trophies? No way someone like you earned real honors." No matter how many years of training or discipline Jimmy possessed, the raw insult cut deeply. He stood rooted in place, struggling between the desire to defend his dignity and the awareness that public confrontation might escalate into something worse. Memories of past injustices flickered at the edges of his mind. But so did the memory of service and sacrifice shared by soldiers of all backgrounds. "These badges represent more than just me," Jimmy said quietly, his voice taut with emotion. "They honor the unity and sacrifices of everyone who served alongside me, regardless of race." Dale's response was swift and violent. He placed both hands on Jimmy's chest and shoved him backward. Unprepared for such aggression, Jimmy stumbled, nearly crashing into the automatic doors. A passing car screeched to a halt just in time, its driver blaring the horn. Adrenaline surged through Jimmy, and he managed to regain his balance, swatting Dale's arm away. The onlookers were stunned into silence, eyes wide at the brazen act. Dale took a step back, seething. "That's what you get for trying to humiliate me," he snarled. "Now get off my property." Without waiting for a reply, he turned and marched back inside, leaving Jimmy unsteady at the store's entrance. The manager's cruel laughter echoed faintly behind him. Shocked and humiliated, Jimmy's thoughts raced. How had things escalated so quickly? How could his decades of honorable service be trampled on by a manager half his age? A few bystanders approached, asking if he was all right. Jimmy mustered a nod. He felt disoriented, the burn of humiliation mixing with genuine concern for Lucille, who remained at home, unaware of this turmoil. He noticed the time on his watch. Nearly 2 hours had passed since he left home. He recalled Lucille's shaky health and the promise he'd made to return promptly with her supplies. The stress of the confrontation began to transform into guilt. Deciding not to linger, Jimmy walked to the side of the building, breathing deeply to calm himself. Emotions churned within him. Anger at Dale's blatant racism, embarrassment at being tossed out like a trespasser, and regret for not resolving anything. He could barely afford the items without the discount, but Lucille's needs came before his pride. As he leaned against the store's exterior wall, trying to collect himself, an unmistakable voice cut through the hustle of the parking lot. "Sir, excuse me, are you all right?" Jimmy turned, half expecting another confrontation. Instead, he found himself face to face with Morgan Freeman. The legendary actor approached him, holding 2 bulging grocery bags. The incredulity that flickered across Jimmy's face was immediate. Had he finally cracked under the strain of the day's troubles? But the man was undeniably real, his measured gaze filled with concern. "I saw what happened in there," Freeman said softly. "No one deserves to be treated that way, especially someone who served our country." Still grappling with the surreal sight, Jimmy hesitated. "And Mr. Freeman," he managed, voice shaky. The actor offered a gentle nod in response. "Let me help you with these," Freeman said, extending the bags. Inside, Jimmy spotted some of the very items he had been forced to abandon at checkout. "Please accept them," Freeman insisted. "Think of it as a small gesture of gratitude from one veteran to another." "Veteran?" Jimmy echoed, finally recalling that Morgan Freeman had indeed served in the Air Force. Freeman's warm smile and outstretched hand were all the confirmation Jimmy needed. Overwhelmed by relief and a renewed sense of dignity, he took the grocery bags. In that moment, the sting of Dale's cruelty felt a touch more distant, replaced by a glimmer of solidarity that only fellow servicemen could truly understand. Morgan Freeman led Jimmy across the parking lot toward a discreet black car. The actor's driver stood nearby, opening a back door with practiced courtesy. Despite Jimmy's initial hesitation, still reeling from the shock of what had transpired, he allowed himself to be guided inside. The plush leather seats and cool interior were a stark contrast to the sweltering heat and hostility he had just faced. Once the doors closed and the car pulled out of the lot, a curious quiet settled between them. Jimmy, still stunned, found himself clutching the grocery bags as if they might vanish at any moment. Freeman turned to him, his reassuring voice interrupting the hush. "I want you to know, Mr. Carter, that I saw everything Dale Johnson did. It was unacceptable." Jimmy exhaled, the tension in his chest loosening slightly. "I appreciate your kindness, sir. In all my years, I've never been thrown out of a store like that." He glanced down at his army uniform, at the badges that had somehow sparked Dale's vicious remarks. "I almost can't believe it even happened." Freeman nodded, understanding apparent in his expression. "I've seen prejudice in many forms," he said softly, "but seeing it directed so blatantly at a fellow veteran felt like a gut punch. I couldn't stand by and do nothing." As the car navigated city streets, Jimmy explained how his wife Lucille was bedridden, suffering from health complications that made daily tasks a struggle. He shared that he normally depended on everyday essentials for discounts on hygiene supplies, adult diapers, and occasionally fresh produce. Because the store had a veteran-friendly history, he never imagined it would turn on him under new management. Freeman listened quietly, his face reflecting empathy. He then reached over and patted the grocery bags. "In here, you'll find everything you needed today and a bit more. Fresh produce, hygiene products, things to keep you and Lucille comfortable. Please don't worry about the cost. Consider it one comrade helping another." Emotions welled up in Jimmy's throat, a mixture of gratitude, disbelief, and the release of tension. "Thank you," he managed, voice trembling. "You don't know what this means to me. I didn't know how I was going to explain to Lucille that I came back empty-handed." Freeman nodded. "I understand, but we're not done yet. I'd like my driver to take us to your home. Let's make sure your wife has everything she needs, and that you, too, are all right." Jimmy thought about protesting, about how he didn't want to inconvenience a famous actor or appear too needy. However, he glanced at his watch, a reflex that reminded him Lucille had been alone longer than usual. Whatever reservations he had were overshadowed by concern for her well-being. The car ride continued in near silence, but it was a comfortable one. Freeman gazed out the window, occasionally asking Jimmy about his military service or small details of his life with Lucille. Each question was asked in a gentle, genuine way that made Jimmy feel valued. Before long, they turned onto a quieter residential street, marked by modest single-story homes. The car came to a stop outside a house, with peeling paint on the front door and a ramp for wheelchair access. It wasn't much, but it was home, the place Jimmy and Lucille had built their memories over the decades. Freeman was the first to step out, grocery bags in hand. Jimmy joined him, apologizing for any mess they might find inside. Freeman responded with a warm, understanding smile that seemed to dissolve any embarrassment. Together, they walked up the short pathway to the front door. Jimmy turned the key in the lock, feeling the weight of the day's events settle on him once again. He braced for Lucille's reaction. She'd surely be worried, and he wanted to offer an explanation that wouldn't upset her too much. "Honey, I'm home," Jimmy called softly as they crossed the threshold. The living room was filled with medical equipment: an adjustable bed, stacked pillows, an oxygen tank, and a tray of medications. Immediately, a frail voice answered from a nearby room. "Jimmy? I was so worried," Lucille called, her voice tinged with relief and concern. "What took you so long?" Before Jimmy could respond, Morgan Freeman stepped in, offering a gracious nod. "Mrs. Carter, I'm Morgan Freeman. I hope I'm not intruding." Lucille's eyes widened in stunned disbelief. Morgan Freeman, standing in her modest home, carrying groceries and wearing a warm, respectful smile? It was so unexpected that for a moment she merely blinked, unsure whether to believe her own eyes. Jimmy gently placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "It's a complicated story, Lucille, but he's here to help." Lucille blinked away her astonishment as Freeman carefully set down the grocery bags, his demeanor gracious and unassuming. Though her body was weak, her eyes shone with vitality and curiosity. She glanced at Jimmy for reassurance, and he offered a small nod. "I saw how your husband was treated at the store," Freeman explained softly. "He did nothing wrong. No one should ever be treated that way, especially someone who served our country." Lucille let out a trembling breath, relief mixing with lingering concern. "Jimmy, are you hurt? Did that manager do anything else after I tried to call?" Jimmy shook his head gently. "No, sweetheart, I'm fine. Just my pride got a little bruised, that's all. I'm more worried about you. I tried calling a few times, but, well, I suppose the battery ran out." A look of realization crossed Lucille's face. "That's right. I forgot to charge it," she murmured, her voice apologetic. Then, turning her attention back to Freeman, she offered a grateful yet tentative smile. "Mr. Freeman, you've saved my husband from a terrible predicament. I can't thank you enough." "Please, call me Morgan," he replied kindly. "And trust me, the pleasure is mine. We veterans need to look out for one another." Lucille's eyes flickered with recognition. "You served in the Air Force, right?" Freeman nodded. "Yes, as a radar technician. It was a long time ago, but those experiences shaped my perspective on loyalty and fairness. When I saw Jimmy facing discrimination in a place that once honored veterans, it struck a chord I couldn't ignore." Jimmy cleared his throat, gesturing to the meager seating in their small living room. "Please, Morgan, have a seat. The house isn't fancy, but we can offer you some water or coffee." Freeman smiled appreciatively, but declined with a gentle wave of his hand. "I wish I could stay for a longer visit, but I have another engagement soon. Still, I wanted to make sure you two have everything you need." He patted one of the grocery bags. "Fresh fruits, vegetables, proteins, enough to hold you over for a while. And, of course, the medical supplies you couldn't purchase earlier. Jimmy exhaled, relief flooding through him. Lucille squeezed his hand, her silent gratitude mirroring his own. After a few more minutes of conversation, during which Freeman ensured that Lucille had everything comfortably within reach, he rose to leave. At the door, he paused and removed an envelope from his jacket, pressing it into Jimmy's hand. "I have to step out now," Freeman said, his eyes reflecting a blend of compassion and resolve. "But I promise I'll take steps to see that no veteran endures what you did." This letter explains a bit more. Read it when you're alone. Jimmy accepted the envelope, bewildered. Before he could voice his thanks, Freeman offered a final nod to Lucille and quietly departed. The hush that followed his exit carried a surreal quality, as if both Jimmy and Lucille were trying to grasp that this extraordinary encounter had truly taken place. For a moment, the couple sat in silence. Lucille reached for Jimmy's hand, tangling their fingers together. "Sometimes I feel like we're forgotten by the world, Jimmy. It's hard to believe someone like Morgan Freeman came to our rescue." Jimmy felt a lump in his throat. "I know," he whispered, "but I can't deny what happened. He was there, and he seemed genuinely determined to help." Eventually, Jimmy brought Lucille a glass of water and helped her settle more comfortably against her pillows. Though her mobility was limited, she insisted on opening each grocery bag, examining the fresh produce and essential supplies. Her expression lit up when she saw strawberries and greens, items she rarely indulged in due to cost. "I can't wait to have a fresh smoothie," she said, her tone bright with anticipation. "You're spoiling me." Jimmy managed a small chuckle. "You deserve it." In the midst of this renewed sense of normalcy, Jimmy remembered the envelope still tucked in his pocket. The weight of it felt peculiar, both literally and figuratively. Once Lucille was comfortably dozing, her exhaustion catching up to her after the emotional roller coaster, he retreated to the kitchen. With careful deliberation, he opened the envelope, finding a handwritten letter and a check. As he began to read the note, his eyes widened in disbelief. The letter expressed Freeman's gratitude for Jimmy's service, acknowledged the country's shortcomings in honoring its veterans, and promised a financial gift to ease some of the burdens he and Lucille faced. Jimmy's heartbeat thundered in his ears as he stared at the figure on the check, $80,000. He reread the number, certain he had misread it, but there it was plain as day. A tear slipped down his cheek. In a lifetime marked by scraping by, he had never held or even imagined a sum that large. The possibilities unfurled in his mind: medical equipment for Lucille, better medication, perhaps even modifying parts of the house for wheelchair accessibility. Jimmy stood alone in the dimly lit kitchen, the check trembling between his fingers as though it might vanish if he blinked. The magnitude of Morgan Freeman's gesture felt both surreal and overwhelming. How could he ever convey the depth of his gratitude? Part of him wrestled with discomfort. He was not used to handouts, nor did he feel entitled to special treatment despite his service. But he could not deny the relief this could bring to Lucille and him. Steeling himself, he returned to the bedroom, where Lucille stirred awake at the rustle of his footsteps. His expression must have told her everything she needed to know, because she immediately asked, "What's wrong, Jimmy? You look like you've seen a ghost." Drawing a slow breath, Jimmy sat beside her and carefully read portions of the letter aloud. Lucille's eyes glistened with tears, especially when he revealed the sum on the check. She brought a trembling hand to her mouth. "80,000?" she whispered. That could change our entire life." Jimmy squeezed her hand gently. "We can upgrade your wheelchair, maybe get a hospital bed that's easier for you to adjust. Even a part-time nurse to help with care." Lucille's tears overflowed, cascading down her cheeks. "I don't know if I'm crying from happiness or just shock," she admitted. Then, with a sudden laugh that blended joy and disbelief, she added, "Morgan Freeman, of all people, coming into our lives like some guardian angel." They talked for nearly an hour about possibilities and practicalities. But as the excitement settled, Jimmy's thoughts turned back to the earlier confrontation. He felt a surge of protectiveness toward other veterans who might still be mistreated at that store under Dale Johnson's management. "I wonder if that place will ever change," he murmured. Lucille gently placed a hand on his arm. "You did your part, Jimmy. You stood your ground, and then found the strength to walk away with dignity. Sometimes it takes a story like ours to catch the public eye. With Morgan Freeman involved, I suspect this won't stay quiet for long." And indeed, it did not. Over the next few days, local news channels buzzed with headlines about a celebrity intervening in a shocking case of discrimination against a veteran. Camera crews flocked to everyday essentials, demanding statements. A wave of public outcry led the company's higher-ups to investigate their new manager's conduct. Dale Johnson was placed on indefinite leave, and the store chain announced a formal apology to veterans. They pledged comprehensive staff retraining on diversity and respect. Meanwhile, Morgan Freeman gave a brief statement to the press, clarifying that the true hero was a veteran who simply wanted to provide for his wife. He declined further interviews, insisting his role was merely that of a concerned bystander. This humility only amplified the public's admiration. Jimmy, for his part, shied away from the limelight. He politely turned down requests for interviews, not wishing to become the face of controversy. All that mattered to him was Lucille's well-being. Still, a quiet sense of pride stirred within him when he heard about the store's commitment to restoring veteran discounts and even expanding them. It felt like a small victory, not just for him, but for countless others who might have otherwise suffered in silence. One afternoon, drawn by necessity, Jimmy returned to everyday essentials. He needed an anti-decubitus cushion for Lucille's bed. He initially sought it at a neighboring medical supply shop, but they were out of stock. As he approached the grocery store again, a rush of anxiety churned in his gut. Memories of Dale's harsh words and that humiliating shove made him second-guess his choice. But there stood the press outside and a crowd of employees wearing newly printed shirts that read, "We support our veterans." Inside, he was greeted by Maddie, who lit up upon seeing him. "Mr. Carter, I'm so sorry about everything that happened. How's Lucille?" She spoke with genuine concern. Her shift that day had been calmer, and the overall atmosphere felt radically different, a sign that real changes were taking root. Embarrassed by the attention, but also thankful, Jimmy thanked her and asked for the cushion. This time, there was no friction, no raised voices. Instead, he found himself quietly rung up with both the cushion and some fresh fruits. As Maddie scanned his items, the system automatically applied a veteran discount. She smiled softly, relief evident in her posture. When Jimmy headed for the exit, he noticed a flurry of reporters filming the store's new manager giving a statement about reinstituting veteran-friendly policies. He caught sight of Dale Johnson standing on the sidelines, looking subdued and contrite. Their eyes briefly met. Jimmy could not read all the emotions flickering on Dale's face. Regret, shame, perhaps a lesson learned. Jimmy offered a small nod, then stepped out into the sunlight, not pausing to address him. The bus ride home felt lighter. With the cushion in hand, he felt a renewed sense of possibility. The immediate crisis had passed, and the memory of Morgan Freeman's kindness burned brightly in his mind. There was also the check safely tucked away at home, guaranteeing that life for Lucille and him would soon change for the better. Life's most profound lessons often unfold in unexpected places. For James Jimmy Carter, that lesson arrived at the intersection of prejudice and compassion, a grocery store where a hateful encounter led to an outpouring of solidarity. The humiliation he suffered under Dale Johnson's bigotry cut deep, but Morgan Freeman's timely intervention and extraordinary generosity helped Jimmy rediscover the dignity he feared he had lost. Through the unwavering support of strangers and the camaraderie shared by fellow veterans, Jimmy realized that battles aren't always fought on foreign soil. Sometimes the fight is closer to home, against ignorance and indifference. The shift at everyday essentials, revamped policies, renewed respect for veterans, and national media attention proved that one voice can spark a broader transformation. Above all, The experience brought fresh hope to Jimmy and Lucille's doorstep. Freeman's gift of $80,000 and the store's reformed approach ensured that Lucille would receive not only the medical equipment she needed, but also the respect and care they both deserved. In the face of adversity, they discovered that kindness can indeed overcome cruelty, and that genuine human connection transcends fame or social status. In the end, Jimmy and Lucille emerged stronger. Their story illuminated a simple truth. Dignity is a right that belongs to every person, regardless of rank, color, or creed. And when one person dares to stand against injustice, especially with the kind of empathy Morgan Freeman displayed, lives are changed, sometimes irreversibly, for the better.